Welcome to the Depth Dialogues podcast.
where we explore how depth psychology is applied to tackle contemporary social issues.
I'm Kirk Schneider.
And I'm Tyler Gamlin. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Today we're honored to be joined by Dr. Skye Cleary, a philosopher, writer, and educator whose work brings existentialism to life in ways that are deeply relevant to our modern world. Skye teaches at Columbia University, the City University of New York, and has previously taught at Barnard College, and even within the prison system. She's the author of Existentialism and Romantic Love, How to Be Authentic, Simone de Beauvoir and the Quest for Fulfillment, and co-editor of How to Live a Good Life. Her thought-provoking essays have appeared in the Paris Review, Aeon, the Times Literary Supplement, TED-Ed, Los Angeles Review of Books, and many others. Beyond academia, Skye applies philosophical insight to the real world, coaching individuals in critical thinking, self-awareness, and leadership. She's a certified fellow of the American Philosophical Practitioners Association, a former editor-in-chief of the American Philosophical Association's blog, and has a background as an equity arbitrager, strategic consultant, and even an Army lieutenant. Skye's work resonates deeply with our mission here at the core of Depth Healers. She explores themes of authenticity, love, and existential challenges of modern life, and we're thrilled to have her with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Skye Cleary to the Depth Dialogues podcast.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Kirk. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here, Skye, and so appreciative of the wide range of your hats that you wear in various fields. And actually, that brings me to my first question, which is, given the variety of roles that you have engaged in, from Army lieutenant, is that right? For the reserve in Australia, to I guess variations on coaching, consulting, and consulting to organizations, and having a good knowledge of business as well. I think you have an MBA as well as background. And certainly, given your work, your very important work in translating great philosophical luminaries like Kierkegaard and de Beauvoir into accessible, communicable prose for a wide range of people is really important, I think, for our era, and for helping people to see how these great thinkers are relevant to our times. So, given all that in your background, I'd like to begin at the beginning, so to speak, of what inspired you to take these various paths that seem to funnel into the important translations that you're doing to our times and to the crises of our times.
Wow, straight into the depth of motivations. I love it.
I know you can handle it.
So I'd say that reason I got into philosophy in the first place was personal issues. I mean, as Nietzsche says, all philosophy is autobiography. There's nothing impersonal whatsoever about the philosopher. So I did actually study philosophy in my undergraduate degree, first year philosophy, hated it. Well, I didn't, that's an exaggeration, but I just didn't resonate with it. It didn't vibe with me. I'm just like, what? and it was a very analytical introduction. And so it was, logic and critical thinking and everything, which was fine, but it wasn't something I was passionate about. And so I dropped it completely and went into finance and then did an MBA, as you mentioned. And during my MBA, I did that at Macquarie University in Australia, and there were some philosophers on faculty there. And so I took a couple of philosophy classes like Foundations of Management Thinking and Existentialism and Entrepreneurship was a class. So there were these different types of classes where I was reintroduced to kind of philosophical ideas in the context of how they apply to the real world and the business world in particular. I was like, oh, okay. And the what really kind of captured my attention was Simone de Beauvoir. And it was in an organizational behavior classroom, and the professor was doing her PhD in boardroom dynamics or existential boardroom dynamics or something like that, thinking about freedom and responsibility. And so, yeah, she started talking about Beauvoir and Sartre, and I was like, wow, wait a minute, who is this? Why didn't they teach me this in my undergraduate degree? And I remember I went to the professor afterwards, and I said, oh, this is so interesting. Like, give me more. What else can I the next class, she brought me a reading list. And so I started at the top with, I think it was Beauvoir's The Mandarins. And I've just been hooked ever since. And there was something about, I was about 27, 28 at the time. And I had grown up, I guess, with this internalized idea that a happy life was about, certainly getting educated and trying new things and sort of stretching ourselves, and also, finding the one, falling in love, getting married, settling down, having babies. And as I was dating, I had a lot of questions that came up about that. I'm like, how do you know who the one is? And how do you know who you're supposed to marry? Is there even such a thing as the one? And so one of my essays in my MBA was sort of a very early exploration of existentialism and romantic love, which eventually became my PhD. But the reason why I got interested in it then was certainly because of that class with the professor talking about Beauvoir, but also around that time, or a bit before that time, a book had come out called Tête-à-Tête by Hazel Rowley, which was about the relationship between Beauvoir and Sartre. And so it was a dual biography of both of them. And I'd read this and I'm like, wow, they're really dealing with similar questions that I was wondering about in my 20s, such as, how much, if you're in a relationship, how much freedom should you give up to be in that relationship? How much should you compromise if you're in a relationship and someone doesn't want you to do a PhD, which was my situation? Like, okay, should I give up my dreams to go and do a PhD? Or for this relationship, which I thought were in love, or what was wrong with that picture? Like, and I knew there was something wrong, in the core of my being, but I was having trouble articulating it. But then this sort of existential narrative that I had been sort of was learning through my MBA and through this book, like this tension between freedom and responsibility and being for ourselves versus being for others, and what a sort of authentic being with others means. This was all like new concepts and a new language to help me understand and articulate my problem to myself, at least. And so it didn't like, it didn't solve all my issues. It didn't tell me what the answer was. Of course, that's not existentialism. It's like, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. So it was like, as Kierkegaard said, so it was recognizing my freedom to is freeing myself from these sort of narratives that I'd internalized about
Mm,
what I'm supposed to do. What were the expectations on me from society and my family and my friends, or getting married, and following this sort of romantic narrative. And so it helped me sort of put that into context. And now I will say I did end up living that narrative. I did end up getting
mm,
married and having a kid. And so I do wonder, okay, so if I wasn't, is this path any different to what I would have done if I hadn't have come across this sort of thinking? And I think it is very different because back then I was able to sort of interrogate my own feelings and my own motivations and my own desires and really think carefully about what I wanted from a relationship, and also be able to communicate with the person I ended up marrying and saying, look, this is how I see a relationship. This is what I need from a relationship. What do you need? What do you want?
mm,
How can we sort of work together so we can both
Mm,
pursue, the things that are important to us, and
mm,
not have to kind of annihilate parts of our, authentic selves, our being, in order to be together? How can we build a constructive sort of relationship, together, to not necessarily to maximize freedom, but because it's a relationship, there are always going to be compromises, but
yeah,
at
oh
least
yeah,
be able to negotiate that.
yeah, it's
beautiful.
what a powerful statement of a lot that you speak about in terms of the what you call the authentic rebel.
Hmm.
It feels like you embodied a lot of those qualities that Beauvoir and Camus speak about in particular. And it seems like one of the most important aspects of that notion of being an authentic rebel is what I might call present centeredness, capacity to be present to the conflicts and contradictions within one's own soul, so to speak, and between oneself and the world,
Mm,
as distinct from just reacting. So it's more of a responding than a reacting, or uh, a fear-based approach to rebelling, which seems to me to often end up quite destructive and polarizing. In any case, what I'm coming around to is I'm wondering how you might apply this idea of being an authentic rebel to some of the problems, the crises, the urgent crises that we face today between people on very different political and cultural sides of issues, and drawing from the thinkers that have inspired you.
I'm reminded of a Beauvoir who says, immobile or in action, we always weigh upon the earth. Okay, so her point was that whether we, uh, you know, everything we do is a choice, even doing nothing is a choice. And so
mm,
we're condemned to be free. And this is particularly what I love about Simone de Beauvoir, because whereas Sartre was much more about, a bit more about radical freedom, Beauvoir was very much attuned to ethics and thinking about, how do we deal with tensions in the real world. Of course, in the second sex in 1949, she was concerned with the oppression of women. And so Beauvoir for me is very much a positive thinker. And I love this idea that the goal is for everybody to be a pure, transparent freedom. And the issue with oppression is that um, if there, so for example, women's oppression, if women have been the second sex, men have been subject, women have been treated as object or other to men. And she says her point is that that means that women can't express themselves freely in the world.
Mm.
And so she also talks about how all oppression is a state of war and how justice can't be created within injustice. So the goal is, and she thought the whole goal of feminism was to create a more just world. And every sort of every time you push back against an established convention, you're a rebel because you're breaking down, social norms and stuff. I mean, and thinking about this in a practical way, I have a teenage son, and every time I ask him to unpack the dishwasher, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. The expectation is for the woman to do it. And I, also have to challenge my internal kind of monologue to say, oh, I want to be a good mom or I want to be a good wife, sort of. So no, it's like making sure that I'm being a good role model for him so he knows that women aren't the default to do the housework or going on vacation. I'm trying to do the same activities as him as much as I can to show him that yes, women are capable in the same ways. So that's how it kind of plays out on a personal level. And yeah, does that make sense? Does that resonate?
That helps a lot, especially in the child rearing area, development, being a model, a more holistic model rather than a very narrow kind of model or oppressive. Um, I am wondering if we push the envelope a little more of how you see that philosophy playing out with, for example, some of the curtailments of free speech
Mm.
we see
Today.
on campuses today or
Yeah.
in other parts of our society, or um, in terms of some of the DEI questions, diversity, equity, and inclusion. How how do people find more constructive ways of promoting, what they consider a more socially just society in terms of some of these very timely problems that we see today?
Yeah. I yeah, in terms of free speech and freedoms, there's it's a big question as to one person's freedom is another person's pain and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And Beauvoir says, one of the only sins, she wasn't religious, but one of the only sins of humanity is to deny another person's subjectivity and or to rob another person of their freedom. Um, and so on the one hand, it's up to, the existential idea is for us to be able to express our freedom. But if that means going and trampling on everybody else on the way, and that's a problem. It's thinking about if I'm going for a job and someone else is going for that job. It's not me oppressing them if I apply for the job and go for the job, but it is oppression if I'm doing something subversive and alienating them and in order to get them out of the way. Um, so, and that's, one of the reasons Beauvoir said that there's no such thing as an authentic Nazi because Nazism does undermine other people's humanity and undermines their freedom and treats them not as human subjects in themselves. And so there's, yeah, there's certainly a balance there, and free speech doesn't means saying whatever you want. It's not just, and being authentic doesn't mean just saying whatever comes into your mind. It's acknowledging that we live in these webs of relationships, and I'm not just going to go around and bludgeon people with indiscreet truths or just say horrible things to everybody. It's acknowledging this intersubjectivity of relationships. It's acknowledging that, yes, you're a human being thrown into the world just like me. And we share the same human condition, and we're condemned to be here on earth. And, that seems like maybe a tenuous connection, but in fact, it's like it's a huge foundation for being able to maybe even start empathizing with other people, and to even start considering how other people might be perceiving the world and their experiences. So I think does that answer your question?
I think so. So a strong place for dialogue, it sounds like, with other people, what Martin Buber might call an I-thou relationship, where
Yeah.
you allow space for the individual, but also for the meeting of the two, for uh, the recognition of each other, which is a big challenge, right? I mean, it's like the messiness of a sort of democratic system that allows for great differences, but in a civil and responsive way rather than reactive, is what I'm hearing. So
Mm,
it's not laying out, and you're not laying out specific answers here, but kind of general directions that an ethics of ambiguity
mm.
might manifest. Yeah.
Yeah. And exactly. And one of the other things, I mean, this is really the foundation of Beauvoir's ethics is, acknowledging our coexistence, and we're responsible for each other by virtue of our being thrown here on earth. Refuse, like, I guess, severing ourselves off from other people, severing those connections, othering other people kind of makes us, even refusing to act, like refusing to be engaged, kind of makes us part of the problem. As for Beauvoir, she talks about how I love this metaphor that, humanity is like stones in an arch. And so we all sort of support each other. Part of, humanity is sort of crumbling, then that makes us weaker as a whole. Um, and I'm also, reminded of Camus on talking about the rebel. And I have a quote here: "The first progressive step for a mind overwhelmed by the strangeness of things is to realize that this feeling of strangeness is shared with all people, and that human reality in its entirety suffers from the distance which separates it from the rest of the universe." So, who calls this kind of, this thrownness, like he calls it a mass plague, and humanity, being human, is this humiliating adventure. Here we are with no apparent reason for being, and oh, we have to make up the reason ourselves. Okay, well, that's insane. And so, even for Camus as well, this sort of these feelings of strangeness, absurdity are a real opportunity for connection with one another. And it's not Beauvoir, Camus, even Richard Wright in The Outsiders, which a brilliant novel, talks about this kind of possibility. I love that.
Huge creative challenge. Creative challenge.
Absolutely. And
Have
yeah,
cookbooks.
sorry,
Because
co-creation.
we don't have cookbooks to tell
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
exactly what we need to do.
Recipes for a perfect life. I mean, well, we have books like the Bible and the Quran, but they're questionable, and so and they're not convincing for everyone. And so yeah, we need to sort of look elsewhere and Um, yeah, and I mean, being engaged is, another sort of key thing, not just doing nothing and standing on the sidelines, but, because our freedoms are intermingled, it's like the onus is on us to actually do something. I mean, it's a risk though, right?
Hmm.
Especially in sort of oppressive situations, people are scared. There are big punishments. There are big costs for speaking out. And I mean, even Beauvoir was attuned to this because she was, of course, writing, before, during, after World War II. And she's like, we each have to sort of make that dizzying choice for ourselves, but to do nothing, to withdraw, to disengage from um, this this situation that is humanity is a problem, and it's like disengaging from life. And so she's like, we have to crawl back up onto the surface of the world and be involved.
Yeah. But what I hear is involved
Mm.
with empathy, with some recognition that we're all in this boat together somehow. Yeah.
And it makes, and I mean, I do. I mean, Beauvoir said she didn't want to be a role model, but I do see her as a role model
Mm.
in many ways. In that, especially because she did take risks. She did speak out. She did recognize her position of privilege in order to stand up for and speak out on behalf of marginalized voices, or try and speak with them, if not not for them so much. But each of us has to figure out, well, okay, how can we participate in the creation of our world, to become a better place, and not just withdraw into our little safe hidey hole cocoons and just protecting ourselves? How can we um uh because then we just sort of collapse into passivity. And she's like, that's the difference between
Mm.
facticity and transcendence. Facticity is collapsing into ourselves and our everyday and going on autopilot, whereas transcending is stretching ourselves into the future, and trying to break bonds for other people too, so they can express and live in authentically meaningful ways too.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the consulting and coaching kind of work. And when I was reading your bio, it says that you're a member of the American Philosophical Practitioners Association. I was curious what that was, and if you could speak a little bit more about how you're applying these, um, I big ideas from existential philosophy.
Mhm. Yeah, sure. So I don't do so much one-on-one coaching, which is what a lot of people who train in the APPA do. But I do more group workshops, certainly, and I um, lead workshops on things like, yes, as you mentioned in my bio, thank you, on self-awareness. And I talk about, this tension between being for ourselves versus being for others, and thinking about ways we can be with others, because being for yourself too much, I mean, that's actually the classic kind of conception of authenticity. Oh, authenticity is just being myself, it's just
Hmm.
saying what I want.
Unfiltered.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
sure.
That's such a superficial definition or idea of authenticity. Um, and the why I like the existential idea of authenticity is that it takes into account this being for others too, this
Hmm.
connecting in the world, coexisting with others. And but of course, if we're all being for ourselves, that's a very selfish, sort of self-centered mode of being.
Hmm.
If we're too much being for others, if we're sort of annihilating ourselves for what others want from us, and being, we start to destroy ourselves, because we're, and that edges towards kind of the slavery
Hmm.
situation. So, but we do need to get along with others,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
This finding this balance, this negotiation, this kind of finding the sweet spot, I guess, of being with others. So that's one of the big things that I talk about in a lot of these workshops, and talk about, oh, what's, what in which relationships are we being for ourselves, in which
Mm.
relationships are pulling us sort of away from ourselves too much in the other camp, and how can we sort of bring those back to a more kind of flourishing thing with others where we can both support, one another's transcendence. Mhm. Yeah,
Sure.
sorry.
Yeah. It makes me think about, your authentic self as you view yourself. This is who I am when I'm alone in my room, and I'm not, this is unencumbered by, catering to other people. But then there's your authentic self as you're working towards some greater good with others, as you speak of. Do you encounter, I'm assuming you would, but what are those kind of barriers trying to make sense of how the two of them work, and in a time where politically there's a big shift towards a separate direction where there's maybe less room for understanding other people's individual focus, and how a greater emphasis, I think, right now on this is the way it needs to be, or you're annihilated. There's what are some of the kind of obstacles that you encounter trying to elicit that understanding in others, that you can have both, and you're not necessarily being inauthentic if you're able to transition.
Yeah, Tyler, you've really hit the nail on the head there. I think that is, one of the key things. I mean, because pe most people, sense that disconnect. Oh, I'm in this
Mm-hmm.
job that I hate with this
Mm-hmm.
boss who's horrible, or I'm in this job and there are, all these competing interests, or I don't feel I can speak up. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the challenges is to think about these different masks that we put on in different situations, and um, and consider, what is a mask in that situation? Are we putting on a mask, or are we just bringing out? The ideal is that we might at work we have to emphasize certain aspects of our being and bring to bear certain skills, but not, mask our authentic selves. And in
Yeah.
fact, the classes I teach is the authentic leader. And so that's talking a lot about, oh, what are how do we sort of align? It's a lot about alignment in
Mm-hmm.
terms, finding work that brings us meaning and in which we can sort of remove the mask and be vulnerable and be, I mean, I hate using the word be ourselves, and I think I already use that, not necessarily because I don't necessarily think there's like this static, authentic self within us. I think authenticity is a process of becoming, of creating our essence, of becoming
Mm-hmm.
who we are. So it's, I think we try on different selves, we try on
Mm-hmm.
different qualities. And I think that's a very healthy way to be, is to be playful, but not to like completely shut off parts of our being, or do things that are, I mean, I've been in jobs before that are soul destroying, and
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm completely being crushed. And so the challenge is either to find ways of relating to other people and the tasks in that job that can allow our authentic selves to flourish, or
Mm-hmm.
to find, if we have to, maybe find another job which is more kind of aligned with our, beliefs and values, and how what we want from life, and what sort of meaning we want to bring through our work life.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give some examples of your work in that area? Like, are you working with organizations right now, uh, or management, and
Yes.
advising them?
Yeah, so I do occasional workshops. Sometimes occasionally they're just one-off workshops. and, giving people a little taste of philosophy and just really I mean, anything that can help people reflect more deeply and sort of disrupt their autopilot at work and
Mm-hmm.
maybe give them a few ideas like some I've mentioned already, not just, being for ourselves versus being for others, or facticity versus transcendence. Okay, what are the facts of my life at work, for example? What can't I change? But what is perhaps open for change? Where is that window of freedom in which I can sort of maybe eke open and kind of
Mm-hmm.
make and stretch myself into? Maybe it's learning a new skill, or maybe it's taking on, a project that's exciting, or pushing for things. Where can I be an agent? Finding agency is very
Mm.
much part of this. I mean, it's hard, especially in bureaucracies where there's, paperwork and stuff. But I mean, wherever we can stop and reflect and try and take a beat and take a time out to get introspective about, what's meaningful for us. What are our values? What do we want? Though these are the sort of conversations we have. Yeah. So sometimes they're just one workshop. Sometimes they're whole day kind of things or series.
Mm.
But it's yeah, I find it worthwhile for me to be that little, I don't know, Socratic gadfly.
Mm.
How about this? And in my class, the authentic leader, I mean, people don't like to hear well, some people don't like to hear hard truths as well. So
Mm.
it's also thinking about, okay, how to encourage them to see different options, even if they're not options they necessarily want to pursue in that moment, just bringing it into their sort of realm of consciousness so they can start seeing different options when
Mm.
often there seems only one option. Oh, I'm stuck. I have to be here. It's too hard to get another job. Well,
Yeah.
let's think more broadly. So that's a lot of the kind of work that I do.
So it sounds to me like you're encouraging people to be more present to themselves and to others.
Yeah, I haven't, it's interesting that's you've said that word a couple of
Yeah,
times.
I know.
Mm.
My therapeutic orientation.
Yeah,
Well,
and I love it because it's not necessarily a word that I anchor or pivot around, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, bringing people into the moment, sort of stepping back, and and sometimes I worry about people saying, "Oh, just live in the present and seize the moment," and things like.
Yeah.
If you're cutting, I mean, I know this is not what you meant.
no, right.
But that's how some people take it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not, yeah, that's I would be concerned about that because it's like you're cutting like it doesn't make sense to cut yourself off from the past and the future. What I try and do is like focus on, yes, this present moment, but thinking about our present in the arc of our lives. Okay,
Mm.
what assumptions are we dragging behind us? Like, oh, an assumption that, oh, I need to work 12 hours a day. I need to make this much money. I need to like do.
Mhm.
So there's these certain things that we drag with us that maybe we're not always cognizant of, or that I found for a long time I was very much attracted to the corporate sort of hard, long hours. And that's, of course, at certain ages, young ages, we're certainly attracted to that. But I felt myself just keep getting drawn towards these very structured, strict roles that was something very deep in my subconscious, like thinking that I needed that security.
Mhm.
Whereas, and I mean, I'm in a realm now where I'm very lucky. I have a bit more flexibility that allows me to focus on more meaningful things, being a freelancer and doing like a few different jobs. So, and that helps me sort of, it's very anxiety inducing in a
Mhm.
different because it's like, oh, where's my next paycheck going to come from? Like how
Mhm.
have that same kind of stability that I used to, but it's also, it's a lot more again, authentically meaningful because I have a lot more control over what I do with my time. And Sorry, I'm getting off track. Where were
No,
we?
no,
Well,
this is all,
very, very relevant to
yeah.
bringing up here is, really presence to the context of the past, the present, and future possibilities, a kind of heightened awareness, a self reflection, as you put it. I mean, it helps people to clarify what really matters, maybe,
Mm,
or what's palpably significant, as we put it, in this moment uh, for this relationship. And it makes me wonder, do you extend that to being more present to one's feelings and body sensations, sort of the
it's a great question.
nonverbal uh, images or imagination? How far does your sense of presence extend for these groups?
Mm, that's a good question. I mean, in some of my work, I do begin with a kind of mini meditate, not necessarily meditation necessarily, but just check in. How are we feeling? How are you feeling? Just take a moment. Just yeah, be in the moment. I sometimes do that in my class, and just tuning into I guess there's this tension between, the rational thinking and the kind of body and emotions and things. And I'm a big believer in, the Nietzschean Apollonian versus the Dionysian, and needing to be in balance, and having them work in concert together. So just I don't know if this is too personal, but there was something that came up for me recently that someone sent me an email which reminded me of something I needed to do, and this wave of dread went through my body. And I'm like, wow, I knew there was something that I was resistant to about this, but I'm like, okay, that's my body telling me I need to
Mm,
pay attention to this. What are these perhaps less explicit, like things that I'm not super sorry, consciously aware of what's going on that I need to sort of pay attention to. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take a time out. I'm going to think about how I respond to this, and
mm,
what I do here, and where my resistance is coming from. And so I'm also, I guess, trying to, encourage other people to do that. Like, okay, listen
mm,
to your thoughts, but what's the thinking behind that? That's and how is that interplaying with the body and feelings?
Yeah, it's like a body wisdom that can
mm,
contribute to your
yeah.
understanding of the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah, quite thoughtful. That's meaningful for me, and that can be useful back to what we were talking about before with being in the present and thinking about how our past and future, what things, what assumptions are we dragging behind us? How is that impacting our present actions? And how can we redirect our intentions for the future, or our commitments, and what we're sort of making leaps towards?
You're helping people to be more conscious, it sounds
Mm.
like, about how we go about life
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
terms of
that's
perspective.
the goal. hmm
So with the core of depth healers, a big thing that we focus on are emotionally restorative relationships. And I'm curious how you see existential philosophy and thought, how that informs our ability to truly see and hear one another in these ways that foster deeper healing. How do you see that those relating?
Big question.
Mm,
Yeah, so the way my brain processes that
hmm
question is through thinking about authentic relationships. And I think this, mutually healing, restorative, I see that as a core component of yeah, authentic relationships. And by that, I mean relationships that are intersubjective, so that recognize that I'm a subject and you're a subject just like me, that you exist in the world just like me. Back to this idea of being thrown in. And Beauvoir says for friendship to be authentic, it must first be free. So authentic relationships are based on this idea of freedom. And what that means is that it's not about being possessive or jealous or dominating, but it's about
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging the other person's right to do as they please. And I say that with hesitation because it's not about doing whatever they want, but having those relationships is about figuring things out together. So, for another example, my when my husband and I got to first started dating, he does a lot of sailing. He loves sailing. It's very much a part of his being, but sailing was always he was always going off and doing sailing things. And I'm just like, are we ever gonna hang out? I was jealous of the sailing.
Yeah.
So part of my process of was of forming an authentic relationship with him was sort of just accepting that that is his passion and that's part of his being, and letting go of
Mm-hmm.
the desire to, or letting go of that sort of jealousy that he's spending time with boats instead of me.
Right.
Um, it sounds.
Questioning like what does that mean and that kind of, but that's part of who he is and he was before you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and saying, okay, well, how can we balance this? And so it's about me also. I mean, I had my own passions, but it was kind of
Sure.
this, also part of those scripts that, love conquers all, and you need to
Mm-hmm.
give up yourself for the other, and this sacrifice is a show of love. Whereas I was starting to realize that no, me going and doing things that I enjoy on my own, like that, and that are enriching for me, that and being able to sort of come together and do things, I don't know, like have a kid together. Like there are
Mm-hmm.
projects that we do together. And so authentic relationships are about finding that balance. And I'm talking about love relationships, but of course the same applies to friendship. I mean, friendships
Mm-hmm.
as dominating and toxic and controlling as love relationships. And
Sure.
so, uh, I guess the kind of acknowledgement that you need to let the other person go and do their thing and respect that. But also, okay, and one of the other things, so there's freedom is that first thing I've been talking about. And the other thing is for restorative relationships or an authentic relationships is this idea um, of challenging each other, like not just
Mm.
passively accepting everything that the other's doing. I'm reminded of Nietzsche, who talks about how friendship there needs to be I forget the exact quote, but it's something like, oh, your friendship needs to be like a shell, and if you bite on it you'll break a tooth. And so what he's saying is that you need to be a good friend means to challenge other people, and to meaning
Mm.
that helping them see possibilities and opportunities that they might not have seen on their own. It's not just someone says something that's really
Mm-hmm.
awful. It's like picking them up on that, or someone saying something that's, selfish or self-destructive. It's saying, hey, actually, have you thought of this? Or, so it's like not just this perfect, oh, you're perfect, you're amazing. It's like, no, okay, let's, uh, be constructively challenging to one another, to push us out of our, autopilot
Mm.
zones.
The accountability,
Yes,
which I can
yes.
also see being difficult when you're also trying to not step on their own subjective being and saying, I accept you for you for who you are, and also I'm going to hold you accountable if we are going to maintain this friendship and not intrude on your ability to live your own life. So that's a delicate balance that I think is lost on a lot of us when we think about a friendship compared to a relationship where the standards may be a little higher when there's the romantic element. With friends, it's kind of like, well, we have this in common, whatever. I accept them. It pisses me off, but what are you going to do? But there really, I think, is more that we need to be able to attune to if that area of our life is that person is coming into our inner circle and they are considered an important part of our lives, but we don't have any sort of expectations for them that we would with our partner. It shouldn't be that different in terms of the balance. If we're looking at it in this way where there is an element of accountability. I'm calling it accountability. You didn't use that exact word, but that's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, I love that accountability. And, friendships, I guess, well, I was going to say they're a lot easier to walk away from, but I don't think I'm going to retract that. Don't necessarily think that's so, but don't get me wrong. It's, it can be really hard to have that kind of relationship where you can be honest and constructively kind to one another. And, I've lost friends over this sort of thing, which is, it's sad, but, also being in a friendship where something's happening that is not okay, like
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be destructive for both people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes vulnerability and it takes understanding and certainly forgiveness. I can't remember who said that, friendship is based on the ability to forgive or something, some philosopher, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true. Someone says something wrong, you forgive or you walk away. And this is another point, I guess another third point that I want to make is that, you know, sometimes we think, oh, who do we count as a friend? And,
Mm-hmm.
this is my list of friends. But, friendship, it's just like love relationships. It's never a static thing. It's always continually in process. It continually requires sort of evaluating and sort of a emotional negotiation in some ways and courage to adapt and um, letting go if necessary. I think friendships can be just as anxiety inducing as romantic relationships.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
of course, the benefit is like if you do get to that point of vulnerability and connection where you do feel that real um, kind of alignment with another person. I mean, that feeling of joy is incredible. That true understanding. I mean, I'm saying true. I'm using true loosely. That
Mm-hmm.
identification with another person. I mean, that is it's pure joy in so many ways. And I think it's important for us to remember that anxiety is the price of that joy of connection.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Well
well put.
put.
I love what you're saying about relationship and holding those sort of contrasting elements, really respecting the individuality of the other person, but also being willing and open to challenging them in a relatively, hopefully, a non-destructive way and a constructive way. So I love the complexity that you're bringing here to our evolution. But I'm wondering, and maybe this is a good closing reflection. I'm wondering how you feel we can best bring this perspective, this sensibility to so many of the societies that we have today that are so quick fix oriented, that are uh, segregated and living in silos, and also depending a lot on their computers or on smartphones. And quick fix, instant result sort of mentality, black and white mentality, uh, just stay in our echo chambers, liberal, conservative, etc. How do we penetrate uh, that antagonism, that really opposition to so much that you are espousing here in terms of respecting and living with the complexity and the anxiety of who we are?
I wish I had a quick fix answer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
A slow fix is good.
Slow boil.
Slow boy.
I mean, I think I would bring it back to this idea of authenticity and thinking about um, authentic living is an exhilarating adventure. It's a way of um, creating ourselves, but creating ourselves, it's not something we can do on our own. We need other people to challenge us, and not only to challenge us, to pull us out of our autopilot zones. And I'm not saying that in like I don't know, when I say that, it sounds like it could be taken in an exploitative way. But what I mean is this is the fundamental kind of existential situation that we find ourselves here with other people, and a lot like in this crazy absurd world with these unthinkable things happening constantly. But bringing it, what's useful to me at least, is bringing it back to this, okay, well, how can I create myself in meaningful ways, in which I can express myself and pursue my passions, but also acknowledge like this web of relationships I have with other people, not just my friends, but in the world, and think about, I think there's a lot of joy and a lot of a meaning that can come from that dual notion of focusing on, becoming poets of our own lives, but also recognizing that that poem is written in collaboration with other people, all humanity even. So I would like to remind us of our interconnectedness and the joy of that interconnectedness.
Mhm. Inspiring message.
Thanks.
Right. I think we'll leave it there. It's a good place to end. Thank you so much, Skye.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Kirk. This was
Thank you,
a nice conversation.
Really appreciate it.